Many people fall into the illusion of praying for a god of some sort in thinking that at the level of God or gods, it is just sunshine and daisies. Everything's perfect, right? There's no conflict and everything is just resolved. This could not be more false. And this is why it's important to recognize the implications of worshiping something and how when you get enough people following something that's distorted and they think that that thing is righteous, this is what ends up causing cataclysms, essentially, particularly wars, as we're seeing right now. And that's a big part of what I want to talk about today. Essentially, we have people that are in the act of worship, right? Which means worship, literally. Because anything that you could do to actually divide from the self is an act of war. And whenever it comes to things that are manifest on the physical plane, it is always coming from the inside. It is always an inside thing. Now, most of humanity does not recognize that they have this sort of power. So we have a lot of individuals running around that have a very divided consciousness, right? And through this division, you get certain things that begin to appear true based on that division, particularly one of them, which is the us and them idea, where we have this whole planet and we have these imaginary lines drawn, and now you have this imaginary line and what's on that side of it, and then on the other side of the imaginary line, and now these two groups are fighting each other. Or there's this whole narrative going around in America where Americans think, where they're like, what would have happened if we didn't fight for our freedom, right? If we didn't fend them off, the attackers, those people over there, right? It's ridiculous if you actually come down to think about it, because we're all the same species. We're all brothers and sisters of each other. We're all woven from the same consciousness. Yet here we are feuding over a planet that is super abundant, depending on how we would utilize those resources. Now, what this comes down to is the world of the gods, right? Because when it comes to the soldiers that go out and fight, they're fighting for their country. Really, it's not the country that's going and fighting, right? Like, you don't see this chunk of land get up and then this other chunk of land and then they go and start boxing each other, right? The land is not fighting, okay? It is a group of people against another group of people, but that group of people is not they're not the perpetrator of the feud. Okay, this often comes from leadership, where you have these people that are in the 1%, often that fund both sides of the conflict in order to make huge profits off of it. So they're these 1% that they go and sit on their private islands, and they have all of the 99%, right? The masses of people go and fight on their behalf. When all they're trying to do really is, I mean, this is like playing chess with pawns on a chessboard. It's ridiculous. And the thing is, like, people have so much pride over this. Like I said, especially in America, people have this sense of pride, like, yeah, military, we're so strong, like our might. We could fend them off. We could go kill all those people over there if they came and threatened us. Think about that diluted sort of mindset and where this might actually come from. So again, back to what I was stating at the beginning of this video, you have the world of the gods. The world of the gods, this is not like I said, this is not heaven, if you will. This is not like the higher astral realms where things are actually unified, things are actually peaceful, because the higher you go in spectrum, the higher you go into realities, the more unified things become. In other words, in order to be in a state that is as divided as humanity is, we're very far from that. So the next level above us, the next spiritual realm above us, is not that. It's far from it. Still, it's far removed from it. And above that, you essentially have these gods that are still trapped on earth because they've done horrible things. Okay? You have a lot of these gods that they're talking to that are very like warlike beings. And you see this in our culture. It's like there's somewhat of like a death cult in the world. People that it's like we idolize like the act of like killing and shooting and fighting them off and war and scrimmaging with each other and this sort of thing. This is like very tribalistic, very survival-oriented mentality. And when it comes to these gods and what they're doing, they are feuding with each other on these spiritual planes. So essentially, I mentioned in my last video how whenever you have these specific countries, you have these specific places, these states however you want to word them, whatever context you want to put them in. These are beings, especially when you have certain stars that are associated with them. A 5-pointed star, a 6-pointed star, a 7-pointed star, whatever it might be, they're a representation, a container of a specific being that is the power source behind that. Okay, and now when you get a specific being that's represented by a specific star and people are worshiping that star, in other words, giving it their praise, giving it their energy, you get this feedback loop. Because let's say you have this warmongering God and there's all these people that are praying to it, like, solve my problems, like fix this. Oh, I pray for this, I pray for this. And this thing, like by its very nature, is war. It is destruction, it is division, because that's the state of consciousness that it's in. Right? We can't assume that these beings that are above us in plane are necessarily more in a state of unified consciousness, right? Power does not necessarily mean morality. Power does not necessarily mean higher levels of consciousness. Power could mean you're just as divided, but you have all of these people praying to you and they're giving you all of this spiritual energy. And now with that, you can go and command things to happen on the plane of physicality. So then you get these gods that plug into these world leaders. And then these world leaders, elites, like I'm not talking about the people you see on the news and things like that, on the TVs, not the people that are in the limelight. I'm talking about the people behind that own those people, that tell those people what to do. They're plugged into these gods that are distorted, that are divided, because they're people who have done such atrocities on this earth that they're not going to be able to ascend. So their only path is to actually go downward, to continue the division, because if they can keep things divided, they can actually stay in power. That is the same story with the gods that they worship, right? So when they're plugging into these gods and they're getting all these people to come and follow these gods because they have fooled these people into thinking, yeah, this God, like this is like El Shaddai, as they call it, God Almighty, right? This is like the thing. And if we worship this, like we'll get to heaven and we'll do all this and it'll be righteous because this is God. And oh, I pray, and they do all these rituals and things like that, right? But they don't know what it is. So they've been fooled into powering this God, which powers the projections of these distorted individuals on earth that are just trying to create more distortion. And because of that, they keep getting involved in all these different wars. All of these different us versus them conflicts, and these us versus them conflicts actually have nothing to do with the people. Okay? You get the ones, obviously, that go off and fight the war for whatever reason they might be involved in that. And it's not their war. It's not their conflict. They're just involved because their consciousness somehow falls within the spectrum of what is actually true within what that being has created. Let me draw a little picture of this real quick to make this clear. So essentially, like you've seen on our dollar bills, how they have that pyramid on there. And at the top of the pyramid, you have the eye, and then you have the saying underneath that is like, in God we trust. And you essentially have this thing going on. Now, I've told you again, God means Odin. Okay, if you go down the etymology rabbit hole of the word God, it means Odin. And Odin was the god of the wild hunt. And the wild hunt was to go hunt hordes of the dead in order to eat them. Okay, so this is another war god. And if you think of even Odin and like the mythology behind that, I think this is correct at least. Like this might be more like the Viking type stuff, but like the idea of like Valhalla, where it's like, yeah, and you'll die and then you'll go to this place where you can just battle forever. Like you can fight forever. You can forever live in a state of conflict. And then at the end of the day, you'll respawn and there will be a feast, and then you'll go out to battle again every day. Like this is the type of consciousness that we're dealing with in these gods, right? So essentially you have these gods over the top. They're like, in God we trust and we empower this thing. And then beneath that, you have these factions essentially of like super elites that are worshiping this god, and they're like they're running with the consciousness of this god, like this, they're like the servants of this god, like the high level ones. This would be like the Pope. The Pope is actually a very literal example of this sort of thing. But then below that you have like the puppets themselves. So this is where you have like the politicians, you have all the people that are in the limelight, right? And then at the bottom, right, you have the masses. You have the people that are so far under the illusion that they're just trusting in God, but God actually has this agenda that really has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with the wholeness of your soul. If we were to talk about wholeness too, like let's say we draw this circle, and to actually quantify wisdom, it has nothing to do with actually the shape, but the fact that I'm using this shape to actually quantify it. Like there's this concept of squaring the circle, right? This circle can be a representation of we're whole. We're whole and everything is together. And they always want it to be this, right? They always want it to be us and them. There's something and there's some opposition, because then we're not seeing our wholeness. We're not in a state of unification. If you can draw a line between something and it's literally two neighboring countries or two neighboring states or something like that, and say, look at this line, because of this line, we're not the same as them. And then they can convince people to actually be in a state of consciousness like that. Look at this symbol. We've all seen this one before, right? Okay, and people talk about that like peace. Like peace, brother. Like think about the idea of fighting for peace. It's like an oxymoron, right? Peace. And then we have peace, because they want you to be in pieces. They want you to separate. They want you to actually be in this state where you're divided and you're not seeing that all of this is you. All of the consciousness is you. If they can keep people divided, they can keep these games happening. And this is why it's so important, my friends, to actually recognize what being whole means. Because it doesn't mean like, oh, we have to go and be friends with everybody. Yeah, like everybody's cool and this and that. No, be aware, be discerning, recognize that there are, in fact, evils in the world, and there are, in fact, beings that are out for destruction like this, but also recognize that under the scope of actual supreme consciousness, which is what people think God, what people are assuming they're praying to when they're praying to God, supreme consciousness, which is beyond God's, that is a unified state, meaning that both the dark and the light are part of this circle. And when you actually unify that, the consciousness essentially becomes whole, becomes unified. And that in itself is a frequency of such tremendous power that they want to keep people from it at all costs. So if they can keep them feuding with their own brothers and sisters, keep them divided, and these gods can keep playing out their game and the people keep serving them, then they're just going to keep humanity trapped in a low frequency state, and they will be able to control them as they descend. Okay, so I know that's a lot to take in. I just went over a very deep bit of information, but it's important to recognize, my friends, war is not this group versus this group. It's not this country versus this country. It's more often than not, it's this God and this God that are represented by these lines drawn in the sand. And beneath them, there are leaders that are puppets of essentially this higher God that they're serving. And this is actually sending energy. Like I said, this is the pyramid. This is the energy, and there's people that fall within this trap. They fall into the spectrum of actually believing in that consciousness, believing in the fight, believing in the cause. And then also, especially if they are like worshipers, right? They get on the warship, then they think what they're doing is righteous. Everybody here is just trying to do what they think is right, what they think is the best course of action, what they think they need to do in order to protect their friends, protect their families, and things like this. But when we really question it, it's like, who do we need to protect ourselves from? Who's the enemy here? Because this is the Trojan horse, my friends. Whenever someone offers you a polarizing decision, would you like red or blue? Would you like left or right? Would you like this country or this country? You're offered this polarizing decision. Of course, there's narratives behind them. Of course, there's different characteristics behind them. But don't assume that you have to polarize. It's this sort of natural thing within our brain that if we're offered a choice, we choose one. It's a survival mechanism. We take one of the paths that seems like the best path for survival, but we're not thinking about higher stages of consciousness, which is recognizing that the trap is falling into it, thinking that we need to defend ourselves from them, from whoever they are that's out there, because they're the bad ones and we're the good ones. So long as you believe that, then you have not recognized that within yourself there is a division. Within yourself, there is some division that has actually got you feeling like there's something bad. And instead of bringing consciousness to that, bring awareness to that, this is like your shadow. If someone brings up like a deep shadow or a deep trauma within yourself and you're like, that's the bad thing, you push it away. You're not willing to face it. You're not willing to see what it is. You're not willing to shine the light on it. Then it gets repressed, it gets suppressed, and it can cause all sorts of problems emotionally, physically, spiritually, right? This is what the planet is going through right now, because you have enough people that are in this divided state that are saying, we're the good ones and they're the bad ones, because the people on the other side think we're the good ones and they're the bad ones. But none of them are. None of them are good or bad. They're just people that are falling for a trick for people that are distorted. See, I'm not even going to call them bad. I'm calling them distorted because consciousness goes two ways. Through the torus field, that is the cycling energy that flows through all of us, that flows through the planet. It is like the staple of life and energy here. The energy can go upward or it can go downward, right? Inward and up, which is ascension. That's actually rising up. That's like the essence of the fluid moving up your spine into your pineal gland, and Christ consciousness being awakened. Because you moved up, you overcame the temptations, the sins, if you will, of each of the particular energy centers, and you chose to stay inward and rise up versus outward, which is saying, oh, this specific energy center, you fell for the sin that is correlated with that one. So instead of going all the way up, it stopped right here. And now the field, instead of being this full field, it stopped here. And now there's a cycling of energy that's being wasted. It is manifesting a literal distortion because you're going outside of yourself for something that is within you. You cannot solve conflict with conflict, right? Like I said, this irony of fighting for peace. That's not how it is. I'm not saying don't stand up for things. I mean, I'm here trying to deliver this message to those of you who are willing to hear this because I'm standing in a place that I believe is the truth, the wholeness, the place from the center, not from a place that comes from, well, if we fight this and if we fight this, if we make sure they know they're bad, right? If we take this out, if we destroy this, remember how consciousness works and how manifestation works, okay? What you focus on and what you give energy to grows. So if you continue to focus and channel energy into something that is distorted, that is war-based, it's only going to create more energy that is distorted and war-based. This is not about being passive, but this is about knowing where we stand as sovereigns, as spiritual sovereigns, because it is within us and from that firm place within us that we are connected with our own supreme essence that is the frequency. It is the literal medicine that the world needs in order to get to a stage where we're not playing these dumb games anymore because some distorted beings who made mistakes and are now falling down the ladder want us to go with them so they can remain in power. We don't need to play that game anymore. We don't need to fall for the tricks that they're placing in front of us anymore because we can go within ourselves and recognize the power that we have as a collective. The more of us that do this, seriously, imagine like if all the people that were like, oh no, this country's doing this, we need to go blow them up or something like that. If they stopped thinking that way, if they started realizing that that's an internal thing and that has something to do with you fear something on the outside or you fear something within yourself that you're projecting onto the outside, and these media outlets and these world leaders are just giving you literal example for that. They're like, hey, we know they're divided, we know they're in fear, let's give them something to be afraid of so they can project that and it'll make it real for them, and then we can use their energy to manifest this conflict, right? This is the same thing with prophecies, right? There's a lot of people that say the prophecies are coming true, and I've talked about prophecies before. Prophecies are for profit. Prophecies are not like, oh, there was this thing written in stone and it's all going to happen because somebody wrote it and they were holy or whatever. Prophecies are so many people believe so deeply in whatever the prophecy is that it ends up manifesting as a result of people believing in it so deeply, right? This is what manifestation is. It is an unconscious manifestation because so many people, oh, I read in this book and I regard this book highly, and so many other people regard this book highly, and it said that this and this and this are going to happen. So I see that this and this and this are going to happen because look, oh, look, it's coming true. See, it's coming true. So therefore, what's written in this book must be true because whoever wrote it, they must have known what was going to happen in the future. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. Why it's coming true is because all of those people are acting that way. They are looking at something outside of themselves. They are divided internally and they're seeing these examples of what's going on as it's manifesting because so and so. They're not attributing that to their own power, to our own collective power and what we're able to create on this world. So my friends, remember that with whatever is going on in the world, this is just another attempt to convince you to divide, convince you to fragment yourself and say, I'm this, or I'm this, or I'm this. They want to compartmentalize us, put us into these boxes, and we need not go into these boxes, because within we are already whole. We're already the circle before they've drawn the lines through it. They don't need to divide us. They don't need to put us into these containers, because we're something that cannot be put into a container. And so long as we remember that, we have our true power, and we're standing in our purpose. We're standing in our supreme. We're standing in our sovereignty in this place. And that's what it's all about, my friends. So with that, remember who you are. Be whole, be well, and we'll talk soon. Take care.